Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Artcasters number 154, and this should be a pretty awesome show tonight. We've got an awesome guest, but before we get to him, first we'll just kind of go around and tell everyone where they can find us. So you're on my channel, so I'm pretty sure you probably know where you can find me. You can also find me at serkworks.com. I got a new website with a new web store and tons of cool products, and everything's up there if you want to check that out. My friend Josh, who is always with us. Hey, Josh, how's it going?
I'm doing fabulous. I am working on comics, so it couldn't be better. You can find my work at quarterlystories.com, where I post pages of my graphic novel as I'm getting it completed. And then you can also check it out on Tapas by searching for Quarterly Stories. You can also, right now, you can actually find me and my buddy Corey on iTunes, which is kind of weird. So we have a little podcast going, which is pretty epic.
Well, what's the podcast, just in case anyone doesn't know?
48-hour Art Check. Sorry, I should probably mention that.
And what is that all about?
So that it's like this little accountability group that Corey and I are doing, and Scott, you've been on it. But it's basically the theory behind it is we check in every 48 hours with each other to make sure we're making progress on our comics. Or our personal projects, and basically to make sure we're actually holding ourselves to account for what we're saying we're going to do. So it's kind of a nice way to kind of keep accountability going and keep driving on a personal project, which I'm sure we're going to get into, because we're going to get into indie publishing and all that beautiful stuff. And a lot of that really requires a lot of self-discipline to kind of get those things off the ground. And so it helps to have somebody like a little, like an accountability buddy,
Okay, did you coin the phrase accountability buddy?
I think that was Corey's buddy,
okay.
but
okay.
I'll take credit for it. I think it's hilarious.
All right. Okay, and our guest today is David Cumbo. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Hey, good.
Where can everyone find you?
You can find me in a few places. In general, with social media, just search for at Dreamprism Press, which is the name of the company that I am publishing works under. So that's Dreamprism Press. So just search on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook. You can find me there. I'm also on Tumblr, but that's pretty inactive. And as far as my website, it is dreamprismpress.com. And most excitingly, and I'll immediately shill, you can find my Kickstarter campaign. Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and put the link there for that. And
yeah, the link is actually in the description of this video as well, and also the link to David's YouTube channel are both in the description.
Right, and so yeah, it's a Kickstarter campaign for a book I'm currently working on and looking to wrap up June of next year.
Cool, and that's what we're going to kind of talk about today, because you've kind of taken a really novel approach to the way you're going after this Kickstarter, or just kind of building your audience in general. And we've kind of talked. Actually, I was just on your channel a couple of days ago, and you're doing right now on your YouTube channel. You're doing a bunch of interviews with different artists and everything. So there's great stuff over there. Definitely check that out. But you got to check out the Kickstarter for, and I'll let Dave explain it and everything. But Yooka-Laylee and the Kracklestone. But I mean, it's just fantastic artwork, and just the way he put the Kickstarter together. Not only what we'll get into as far as the unique approach to this, but just the video and just the way he did the tiers and everything's laid out, and just the planning behind it. I mean, it's just really brilliant. It's like one of the best Kickstarter projects I've seen. And you're fully funded as of yesterday. And we'll get into some of the unique things you were telling me about that, as well as how you kind of were able to overcome sort of that trough that happens in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign. But you still, even though you are fully funded, we definitely got to check it out and everything, especially if you're a fan of the property. But anyway, so I'm kind of rambling. I mean, Dave could explain this a little better. So why don't you tell everyone about Yooka-Laylee and Kracklestone?
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it certainly was a lot of work to get that Kickstarter together. Hopefully it'll pay off. And I guess, since we are successful as of yesterday, then that's something that I can say, as long as not everybody suddenly pulls their pledges, that I can say with confidence that we will end up successfully funded. So yeah, it's a unique project. I come from the games industry. My majority of my work was about 6-7 years with the company Insomniac Games. Worked with them on mostly Ratchet and Clank games, some Resistance, Sunset Overdrive. Worked on and one of my favorites, a tiny little title that nobody played called Slowdown Bowl, which was actually done on a contract basis after I left. I went from that into trying to kind of make it work in graphic novels and illustrated books, which is an odd move, I admit. But it wasn't so much that I was fascinated by the medium, to be honest, at the time. It was more that I had stories I wanted to tell and not a lot of money to be able to hire teams of animators to make it into motion. And so I thought, I can make these as books. And as far as I'm concerned, if it gets the story done and the artwork is where it needs to be, then that's good enough. And so I left and worked on an independent project for about 2 years, basically teaching myself how to make comics and realizing just how incredibly hard they are, which is a big surprise to me coming from, had a nice ego check there because I came from storyboarding and I thought comics would be a cinch. And it turns out they're about 5 to 10 times harder than storyboarding, in my opinion, anyway. And so that was a good lesson and challenge, and it took quite a bit longer to get where I needed to be. And eventually, I decided to, I guess, make good on some ideas I had about projects to work on that were ties with video game developers. And coming from the games industry, it made sense to speak with some of these developers. I had friends of mine who had work at various studios, trying to find kind of the perfect project to begin doing an adaptation. Because in general, as we talked about the other night, Scott, you have all these awesome assets produced for games that get dropped, and with games themselves, you have a different focus. You have a focus on gameplay, unless it's a story-based game, of course. But in general, games are about gameplay. Books are about stories. And so they kind of work hand in hand. So I thought it was just kind of a hole in the industry, really. There aren't an awful lot of game adaptations. What surprised me wasn't just that there weren't a lot of good ones, but there also just aren't a lot of comic adaptations of popular games. And I think part of it is because big publishers are probably a little hesitant to make such specific niche products, even if you have a game that sells well. But I don't really understand why. So I figured, why can't I do it? So I found a good starting project, and it was Yooka-Laylee, which is a game developed by Platonic Games, which is a sort of it's a unique new indie studio that's comprised of ex-Rare developers. So folks that made the games of my childhood that I really enjoyed, and now I'm getting a chance to work with their property and doing my best to make it into a killer book. And worked on it for about 2 years before the Kickstarter, just to get it where it needs to be. And now I'm confident that it's going to be about another 6 months to wrap it up. And so I figured it was the right time to do a Kickstarter.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Now you have a personal project that you've been developing, and you kind of made the choice to kind of put that on hold for a bit and focus on this adaptation, the Yooka-Laylee project. So what was the thought process behind that?
Well, that's kind of a complicated question because it's multifaceted in terms of why I made that switch. It was a hard thing to do, honestly, because I had just, you have to kind of put this in perspective. I'd worked full time at Insomniac, and then I would work nights, just coming home, developing the skills and learning that I can't draw the way that I need to. And it just took so long to develop my skill. I'm really not an extremely talented artist. It took me a very, very long time.
I'm going to have to laugh at that, but go ahead.
Oh, well, no, it's just that it took a long time to get it where I wanted it to be, and I had to, the thing is, we'll put it this way. If you knew how many hours I kind of pulled my hair out over the quality of the art, you'd see, and if you saw where it began, you'd understand. I feel like it took a long time anyway. So, it was a long time doing that, and then finally saying, all right, let's make a go of it. I'll try to do this full time. And maybe that's nuts, but comics are not as lucrative an industry as video games, and it's hard to make a living doing them. Sometimes you just have to jump off the cliff if you feel like I think part of it is just you have a desire to something that won't leave you alone. It won't stop nagging you. And you just have to shut it up and be like, all right, I have to make this project or I'll lose my mind. And it was also another facet. This is all coming around to your question. That's why I say it's multifaceted. Part of the frustration I had at the time was that I think it was affecting my day job my performance at work a little bit. And that's not fair to the team, So there's a certain point when you have to say, all right, what is it that I really want to do? And, it was the right time. And I figured if it was going to happen, it would have to happen now. So I left and worked on Dreamside. But then it was another 2 years. I thought it was going to be 1 year until it was ready for publishing. And then finally, after years of working on it, I had a chance to talk with some publishers about it. And the general consensus was that, even though I had kind of worked to form a social media following to the best of my ability, it just would not sell enough copies to really be able to kind of, it wouldn't have sold enough copies for me to continue doing this full time, right? And that's actually a really hard thing to do with an independent property anyway, even a reasonably successful one, because you don't know what's going to happen next. So what was kind of crazy was I had this idea years prior about doing game adaptations. I just thought it would be fun. There's so many great games out there, and I thought there was one in particular I wanted to adapt, and that was a project called Shantae, which is a popular indie game. And at the timing was never right. The budget was never right. It was just never the right time for it. So what I basically realized was I need to figure out. I have two choices. I can quit what I'm doing and go back into the industry and work in a studio job again, or I can change my method and try something else. And I thought, well, if I go back into a studio job, it would be great. I'd go back to a secure income. I'd have my benefits back, all that good stuff. And I thought, well, in a way, it's kind of going backward. Even if I were to go to a different studio, it's awesome to work with these game studios, but it wouldn't change the desire, Right. So I thought, okay, I've got to just try one more crazy thing. And luckily I have quite an understanding girlfriend. As I said, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start all over with another book. And but this will be a game adaptation. I didn't know what it was going to be, but my thought was, if I can, it's been all this time trying to bring an audience to me. And I thought that's backwards. What I should do is go to where audiences exist and make something that they would enjoy. And even if it's a niche audience, because I'm alone and I'm not trying to make a ton of money, I could make something for a very specific audience that really would not sell a lot of copies in a way that most publishers would not do. It just wouldn't be worth their time. But for me, I just have to pay basically my bills, and I could make a book and I could take a chance on it. So I said, well, let me find the best property that I can to work with. And Yooka-Laylee was just funded on Kickstarter, the game. And I thought, this is perfect. It's just the way I'd want to release the book. It gives me full control over the development of it, provided, it together with the studio. And it was just a no-brainer situation, because it was literally, if I had a dream property, it would probably be something like Banjo-Kazooie, which was the sort of the spiritual ancestor, right? Is that the term? Of Yooka-Laylee. And so here comes this game out of the blue, Yooka-Laylee, which is like, I would never get Banjo because it's owned by Microsoft. I'd have to deal with a lot of people, right, and they wouldn't trust me. But here's Yooka-Laylee, and I can basically tell the same story that I wanted to tell with Banjo. It was funded on Kickstarter, so we can kind of have the book released the same way. The game did extremely well. It raised something like $3 million, and it had 72,000 backers. I thought, this is a rare opportunity.
Right.
And so I called up I happen to have a mutual acquaintance with the studio, the composer, Grant Kirkhope, who we just knew from a little while back. And so he connected me with the studio, and they were just surprisingly amenable to working together. And they gave me a ton of freedom. Basically, they really didn't want to worry about it because they were so focused on the game. And they also were very concerned about annoying their backers with another Kickstarter campaign. So and it would be a long time until they had fulfilled backers. So they said, all right, if you want to do it, you can do it, but you're going to have to do this all yourself. And, we'll license the characters, and we'll just kind of check and make sure that everything is up to our standards and fits in with our canon, so to speak. And they just kind of let me go.
Well, now here's a question. Now, to me, it seems like that's the ideal scenario for you. Is that had they not said that, had they given you the option to, run it through their Kickstarter, I don't know how do you say that? Whatever they ran the video game through, would you have preferred that? I'm guessing not. I'm guessing you would have wanted them to kind of let you run it on your own, under your own name, your own company, and sort of, like you said, license the property.
Yeah, you're right. It was exactly that. It was the tricky thing was, it wasn't tricky actually. The perfect thing, the reason it was perfect, it was serendipitous really, was that what they wanted, and they were asking me, they were saying as if it was a negative, was the thing I was dreaming of. And so it was a perfect thing that we both wanted. They wanted to absolve themselves. So I often say this, and people think I'm just trying to talk up Platonic, but they really are so concerned about campaign ethics with the Kickstarter that they wouldn't. And I often joke about this, that it just sounded like they didn't want to pay me, but they would not use any Kickstarter money for anything except what it was intended for. But they were very clear on that right from the beginning. They said, we will not be able to pay you because we don't have any funding besides Kickstarter, and we won't use the Kickstarter money for anything but the game, because that would annoy backers and it's unethical. And so I thought that's perfect, because I don't want payment. I'm doing this as an equity investment. I want this to be something that I can, if it's successful, I want to be able to benefit from it. And so it was a perfect situation. I said, let me manage this. We'll figure out a legal arrangement that works. But it was just perfect for both of us. If they had pitched, as you asked, kind of an alternate situation in which I guess Kickstarter, being closed off, like if it was a Patreon or something like that, but Kickstarter was closed off, so that wouldn't really be an option. But essentially, if they were to produce and publish or manage, I don't know. I would just have to depend on the situation. It would just have to make sense. I mean, I wanted to make the book, and there were a lot of things that were pitched in the beginning. They did have a licensing coordinator in the beginning that had pitched a couple of ideas, including working with another publisher, with Titan Comics, actually was the publisher. And there was some discussion there, but my gut feeling on it was bad immediately. I felt like I was being pushed out of my own project without even getting a few conversations in. And I just thought, it isn't right. And luckily the studio, this is the nice part about working with a small studio, is that I can get basically on the horn with the head of the company and say, look, this is the relationship I like. What do you think? And he says, that's good for me. And then we're kind of locked in.
Cool. That's awesome.
That is rad.
So what we were talking about before with your personal project, Dreamside, which also is just a beautiful, it looks, definitely check that out on his YouTube channel and see what that's all about too. But, this is what I really find fascinating, is that you found a way to kind of branch out and tap into this pre-existing audience, tell a story that you want to tell. It's totally legit. It's not like a fan art type situation, even though you are a fan of the material and everything, but you're able to kind of partner and like get this license without actually, you're trading your time and the effort you're putting into this book, as opposed to, here's however much money to license that product, which is the typical model. But you've kind of created this entirely different model out of whole cloth. And I find it really fascinating. And we've already seen it fund, and it, and of course you needed to, keep funding. But yeah, I'm just really impressed with just the way you approach this. And we had talked, I don't know when the last time we talked, when we first started talking, I don't know, it was a few months, maybe even a year or somewhere in between a year and 6 months or something. And you were kind of explaining to it, but you couldn't tell me a lot because it was, it was still, whether it's NDA or you're still working on the deal and everything. And I didn't fully understand it, but we were talking about, we'll get you on the show when you can talk about it. Now that you are able to do that, I'm just even more impressed with how you put this whole thing together. So,
thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, but I think that I just love these stories of people that kind of have this out of the box way of bringing projects to life and building your audience, because the really cool thing about what you're doing is you're able to tap into this audience for Yooka-Laylee. If you watch the Kickstarter video, it's all centered around David and how he has a passion for this, and so it's very much, and that's what you should do with a Kickstarter, is make it about yourself. Make it, this is why I want to do this project. This is something I love doing, and it's all there. And you're able to kind of take that audience and after this is successful, and hopefully it will become more successful, you can parlay this into either you've got that fan base where at the end you can send out, hey, this is the new project I'm doing. It's Dreamside, or another sort of, adaptation project with another video game. But I just love the kind of the idea behind doing this. It's kind of like, oh man, I wish I would have thought of something like that. But, yeah.
Well, it's funny because everything you just mentioned is out of necessity, right? It wasn't really creativity; it was necessity. Because like even things like the Kickstarter video, in terms of how that's focused on, it is focused on me. That was basically because that was really to help Playtonic avoid any conflict with their existing campaign. If we had made it, if it was something that Playtonic hosted, then their fan base would probably revolt and get very upset with them.
Right.
Because, I mean, the biggest problem is that Playtonic is still working on some of the campaign rewards from the previous campaign. So that put me in a weird situation where if they were to host the campaign again, they could do it. But if they were to do it, it would have to wait until they had all that done up. And the problem is that, mind you, all of this, I don't have the information I have now 2 years ago, so I didn't know how long it would take. I thought everything was kind of unknown. And so I just kind of went along with the flow. And, but the desire was to host it for the very reasons you say. I mean, I care a lot about Dreamside and about my original projects, of course. And so this is definitely, I mean, just to be straightforward, a lot of this has to do with trying to build an audience in a unique way, but mutually, two things can be true at the same time. I love this property and I love Yooka-Laylee, and it turns out that I'm as impassioned working on it as I was for Dreamside. I mean, 2.5 years in this project, which is actually longer than the full final run of Dreamside actually took. So it's been a massive labor of love, and I felt all that sort of nostalgic childhood passion for these games that I've loved as a kid just bubble up while working on this book, and just throwing it all into this book. It's just this incredible love letter to fans of Banjo who had the same experiences that I had. And then finally, just in terms of saying that things were done out of necessity, when you talk about the process of doing a Kickstarter and having that be successful versus going with a different deal or with a publisher or something like that. I only know what I know, but in general, my impression is I'm doing what I'm doing because it's as far as I'm aware, it is, as crazy as it sounds, it seems to be the only way that I can possibly eke out enough money to make a living, to pay the bills. And it's not a lot of money. But it's the only thing I can do. When I was talking with publishers, I had a wonderful publisher friend of mine who gave me a good 2 hours to sit down and talk about the math, and said, look, the way now is you put books on Amazon. Everything has to be on Amazon, which is the worst. And the problem with Amazon, which is the best, the best, and that's why it's a problem, is because Amazon keeps undercutting. Basically, if you sell something anywhere else than Amazon and on Amazon, you will compete with yourself. It's an amazing, weird dilemma where you want to reach a lot of people, and if you don't sell on Amazon, you won't, right? Because everybody wants to buy from Amazon. Everybody wants free shipping. But if you do that, who's going to buy your full price book anywhere else, including your own site?
Right.
So basically, the difference is, if I have a $30 book, and this is as straightforward and blunt as I can be about the math, is, if I have a $30 hardcover that I make this premium book, right? I can't do a retail edition of that and have all the stuff I have in here. I can't do a hand sewn binding. It's going to be the junky glued junk that passes for hardcovers these days. You know, it's gonna be it's a perfect bound book. This is what they call. For those who are unfamiliar with publishing terms, a perfect bound book is like a soft cover that has a glued spine. And when you try and open it, first of all, in 5 years, it'll crack and it'll break. You know, the new ones are better than the old ones, but it's designed to be a cheap format. In fact, the reason it's called perfect bound is because it was the perfect way for all people to afford books, because it used to be that books were so expensive. I just kind of made that up, but but it makes sense, doesn't it? You know, like 1900, only wealthy people had books. You know, and so the way to make books for the masses was to have this new, cheaper format. So when you go to retail, you just cannot get this type of book at this price point. And if you do, it's a loss leader or something like that. But a book like this in retail will cost $50, and that's because retail you're immediately selling wholesale to a retailer, so that's 50% right off the top. Now, if you deal with the publisher and we have a 50-50 split, then that's fair. Our 50-50 split comes after the retail. Retail is the first thing. It's 50% off the top. So a $30 book, we're left with $15. Then we have roughly $2 to $5 out of that distribution. We're left with $10, and then we have to pay for production. You know, which means coffee and rab lamb for the studio or whatever. And it's like, okay, we're left with $6, and then if we're lucky, and then we split that 50-50, and then maybe I'll make $3 on a $30 book. So what am I going? How many copies of Yooka am I going to sell? 1,000 at most, I'd say. So I can't make a living on $3,000. It's a simple thing, and they might give me an advance, but the advance is not going to be enough. I'll be in poverty wages, and so the fact is, in order for me to make enough money, and again, I'm really just trying to make just barely beyond poverty, and I'll be happy, at least for the first project.
Right.
But the only way to do that is to do a direct sale model, and so, I have a book. And it costs $30, and you give me $30, and I give you a book, and then I pay taxes and pay the cost of the book, and whatever's left, I get to keep, and that's a great model. It's old fashioned. And the great part is, if I want to be creative with the books, I can afford to do things like put embossing and foil stamping on the cover, do all these fancy things. This is a hand sewn book. Literally, it's Smythe sewn. It's the best binding you can get in a book. It's going to be a reinforced binding. It has thick cover stock. I mean, I like, it makes you like hungry to talk about this book. It's going to be so beautiful. And it's expensive to do that. And every publisher will laugh you right out the door. The first publisher I talked to, I said, are we going to do a hardbound? If we did, because I was talking to a publisher about doing Yooka and Dreamside. I said, hardbounds are really important to me. Quality is really important to me. And a quality hardbound, not a fake hardbound.
Right.
And they said, they laughed and they said, maybe, we'll see what we do in softbound. And then if it sells well enough with the hardbound, I said, that's backwards. Don't start with the softbound. You have the biggest fans up front.
Right.
They want a high quality book. And then you introduce the softbound to the mass market. Why would you start with the soft? Anyway,
that's pretty much the way it is in traditional publishing, isn't it? Usually the hardcover books come out first, and then the softcover.
Yeah. Like if I buy a Stephen King book,
right.
It's a $35 hardcover if I go to Barnes and Noble, which is amazing that it costs $35, and it's probably going to be a fake hardcover.
Yeah.
Those are so cheap to produce. Yeah, that's not. I want a system that's old fashioned. You have people care about this property. I want to give them the best edition that I can. And the thing is, I'm just not going to gamble and say, can I sell 1 million copies of something? Because that's just not going to happen. Maybe one day, but it's going to be a long time coming. And right now it's going to be 500, 1,000 copies. If I'm very lucky, I might hit 1,500, and if I can, but the thing is, if I know who the audience is, I don't have to do the Amazon thing and do the random marketing thing, because I can just go right to them. I go to the Yooka-Laylee community and say, look, I spent 2 years making something just for you. Does it interest you? And if so, here's my Kickstarter, and hopefully it'll continue working.
So how much, now we kind of talked about how Playtonic's preferred for you to kind of do this on your own because they're still fulfilling their own Kickstarter and all that kind of stuff. But how much were they able to, promote what you're doing, I assume they have done that, right? So that just to let their fans know about this, that you're doing this.
Yeah, well, actually, they have been very helpful with that. But that's happened in sort of a backwards capacity. Everything's been backwards. Everything's gone against my expectations all the way down the line. I'm either terrible at predicting, terrible at doing my research, or just things just randomly have gone the opposite direction in every capacity, which I can elaborate on. But their promotion, the thing that I wanted right in the beginning, I said, all right, I don't need any, financial help. I just, I'll work off my savings. I still had savings, and I don't need money up front. So the only thing I really need from them is promotion. I said, obviously you have all the power in the world to reach the fan base for this. And we both agreed that makes perfect sense. And when the time comes, we agreed that a good thing to do would be to do an update email to existing Kickstarter backers, because with the 72,000 backers, it makes a lot of sense to reach out to them and say, hey, now there's a book. But what slowly happened over time was, backers on Kickstarter sometimes can get, upset if things take too long. And so there's kind of this concern about angering backers. And so, I really have to give them credit, because they followed through and they did send an update email. I really don't think it resulted in that much support, to be honest. I thought the majority would come from there, and it turns out that the vast majority, as far as I'm aware, seem to come from Twitter promotion.
Really? You're doing yourself?
No. That they did. In partnership with myself, we would kind of share and that sort of thing, and they've been assisting with that. And yeah, it seems to be the current social media followers that have been the most supportive. To be fair, I don't really know exactly how many are coming from existing campaign supporters. I think the reason that I feel it's not so much, I don't know what ratio it is, but what I do know is that if you were to talk to any sort of market analyst to say, how many copies do you think you'll sell of this book? And if you were to use the information on hand, you would look at something like that. You'd say, well, these are the people who are obviously fans to some degree, because they bought something before it existed, for this particular game. You couldn't get a more specific fan base than that, and then they do things like they say, oh, you might sell to 5% of that base, or 1% of that base, or 10% of 10% is something that they often say. But all of those numbers are significantly larger than what I currently have on Kickstarter. And so I think it's a combination of a bunch of things. I think people are losing faith a little bit in Kickstarter as a platform. It doesn't have the same prestige that it had just a few years ago. It's got, I think it's in its terrible twos or Fantastic Fours or whatever you call that age, where it's kind of coming into its own, and the cracks are showing. It's having to work through those cracks, and it is maybe unfortunate timing for a lot of Kickstarters right now, just because people do not have that excitement about Kickstarter that they used to have, and there's a lot of wariness. Sort of what I've heard a lot from people is, oh, I'll pick it up when it's out. I'll pick it up later, and I will try and respond and say, hey, this might not exist later if it's not funded on Kickstarter. But I totally understand people's problems with Kickstarter and objections. It's not a perfect system for me to use, especially with the fact that the game was funded on Kickstarter, and I don't want to cause any sort of anger within the community. But it was just such a perfect thing. It's really the only option I had, to a degree. Because I can put it up, like I could just take pre-orders on a website. I could wait until March of next year and say, okay, this book's shipping in a couple of months. We'll take pre-orders here. But people are not going to trust my website as much as they trust Kickstarter, And so I just thought, I need a storefront that's not going to take all my money. I need a website that's not Amazon. It's not going to take 50% of everything. Kickstarter takes 10%. That's the best deal ever. When it comes to a respected storefront. And if you think of Kickstarter like a store, it's just a pre-order. It's another way of thinking about it. It's the most brilliant store there is. It comes down to campaigns to have the wherewithal to actually follow through on their promises.
Yeah, and in regards to that, like you had mentioned, some people are a little skittish about Kickstarter because some of the things that have happened in the past or whatever. And I'm that way to a certain extent too, because most of the time I usually prefer that if you're doing a comic that you have at least the bulk of the artwork done and everything. But I don't know what percentage you have done, but the thing is, the way you constructed your campaign and everything I've seen just gives me the confidence that plus knowing that you've already completed a book, even if it's not published yet. I have a feeling that you're going to be able to deliver on this. So it seems like you've kind of proven that just through what I've seen. Whereas. Yeah.
Well, it just to respond to that really quickly, it's what that is. It's just a matter of waiting long enough, because I think part of the problem with Kickstarter, and I think this is a shift that needs to happen with Kickstarter, at least with some projects, is that we need to have more later funding, because the problem is that a lot of folks jump into Kickstarter for obvious reasons. At the beginning of projects, they need funding. But I guess the problem is that if you're too close to the beginning, it's too hard to predict the end date. It's too difficult to, like, a good example is myself. You think that it looks professional, but when I started the project, my predictions were that the book would take 10 months. It took 2.5 years. So if I'd funded at the beginning, I'd just be one of these campaigns that keeps saying, oh, I need more time. And then I annoy all my backers. And I didn't think it would take longer than 10 months, maybe a year at most. But what I just knew instinctively was that it would, I knew that there would be a problem if I did it too early. It's just too much to manage. And so, I figured I'll wait as long as I need to make sure that it's a respectable position. So all the line art is done. It's 120 pages. And I've got maybe about 16 pages colored. And so the rest of the time, which will take about 6 months, is all color. So that's what's left to do. And I can itemize that very clearly and say, all right, I know exactly how long this is going to take. I know how long it's going to take to print the books. I'm printing the USA for the books. So we have a 2-week turnaround on them. And so, the math is very easy to manage at this point. And I figured, look, I put in the risks and challenges like you have to in Kickstarter, that there's always a chance of delays. Things can, the printing plant could blow up. There's all kinds of things that can happen that cause the project to get a delay, and that's always possible. And I ask backers forgiveness in advance in case there's anything like that comes up. It always can. I don't expect it to. I actually expect you to get your books early, because I'm hoping that I'm going to finish the color in total by the middle of May. And so if we can get right on printing then, I might be able to deliver in earlier June. Always a chance it will delay until July if it just takes a little while to print. So it's just a matter of making sure that you wait long enough, that as long as you can, but you can't wait too long because I would run out of money. And so there's a certain point where I just have to say, all right, the time is now. I actually would have liked to wait until the book was done. My hope is that we were basically going to use Kickstarter like a store and just say, look, the book's done. It's ready to go. It'll ship to you basically at the end of the campaign. We'll start printing immediately, but it didn't work out that way.
Yeah. So in regards to the quality of the book and everything, I'm just going to go to the chat here. Robert Johnson says, I like a hardcover comic. I know it's going to be more expensive, but I'm willing to pay for quality. And I think most people, realize that. And that's why even, there was always this debate when people are doing web comics. Well, if you put it out on the web for free, aren't people not going to buy it? And I mean, so many people have proved that wrong, because I think people want that nice physical copy. And the nicer you make it, I think the more it's going to, it's going to really be something that people want to have on their shelves and want to have just own it, rather than the physical copy, rather than a digital copy. So
well, we talked about that a little bit the other night, but that might be fun to just recap on a little bit, is that because that's actually a very fundamental part of the philosophy on what I'm doing here, which is when I talk to people about the physical editions and how important they are and how important the high quality physical editions are. I usually have to tell people 5 times over before they realize what I'm really trying to say with it, which is the physical quality, the physical existence of the books is imperative, and the physical quality is imperative, because what we're experiencing this is just, we've noticed this over the past 5 years. 5 years ago, if you talk to a lot of industry folks, they would tell you that books are going away, and that we're just like music, movies, and games, the physical editions. Whereas most people are moving to digital for music, most people move to digital for movies, less so than music, and most people move to digital for games, more so than movies. So the thing that's different about books is that the delivery method for all four, books are the most unique in the sense that the tactile experience of having a book is part of the experience of reading a book. With a movie, you have the physical, handling the physical disc is not part of the experience. You know, you put it in the DVD. Maybe for some people it is, but you put it in the DVD. You know, they ooh and ah over the rainbow effects that the underside of the DVD has. But you put it in the player, and then the experience is watching what it is. Right? That's the product. So discs are just delivery methods, and so it makes sense that they would start to kind of phase out a little bit. But what have we seen remaining is books. They just kind of stick around. And in fact, I had read recently that books are actually being sold at a higher rate than they were 5 years ago. So what's my theory on this is that people, especially young people who grew up from birth with digital products, everything's on your phone. They don't own anything. Everything's borrowed. Everything's licensed. You know, you download music from iTunes, you don't own it. And if Apple's servers shut down, you can't download it again. You know, old school, you have discs on your shelf, you have LPs on your shelf, and it doesn't matter what happens to the companies that made them, you still have your discs. You know, but young people, I think, are hungry for ownership of things. They want something that represents their passions, and young people are very passionate about video games. Very, very, very passionate about video games. And what I hear all the time, just working in the industry, is that people want physical copies of the games. Like take the Nintendo Switch. It's a strange phenomenon with the Switch because it has a cartridge. So it's kind of old school. It has a more tangible ownership. It's a trophy aspect. People want that physically. They get the same thing digitally, but they'll pay a premium to buy it physically. Same product, same thing. They can get it $30 in the store. They'll buy it $40 physically. They'll buy it $75 physically if it comes with special edition stuff. Mm-hmm. And what they'll do is they'll play the game and then they'll put their physical stuff on the shelf. And that way they can represent the things that they're impassioned for digitally, and they can represent that physically. So with the books, with the Game Legends series, what I'm trying to do is have something where you have a physical manifestation of what you enjoy about the games. You know, by doing Yooka-Laylee, it does have physical versions, but not all games that might be adapted in that series will have physical editions. And so I think what we're seeing is a clean out of a lot of the junk. You know, the sort of cheap delivery methods are getting wiped out a little bit, and we're getting rid of some of the waste. And what's left with physical is better than ever. And we're seeing more high quality physical stuff being produced. And you can see that if you just walk into Best Buy. You go into the movie section, you'll see how many unusually high quality sets there are for DVDs or for Blu-rays. You know, they'll include books. They'll have a steel book. You know, they'll have some sort of booklet inside or collectible something that comes with it to a greater degree than I've ever seen before.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that young people are gravitating towards the physical media because I was, you know, when, like with comics, when they first started to go digital and the comic book apps came out, you know, I was like, well, this is the end. But I've talked to comic book publishers that say, oh, digital is like people that publish traditional and digital. And they say, I mean, the digital is like minuscule. Our sales on digital is minuscule compared to our physical books. So it's just not, and so it just didn't turn out the way, you know, that I think a lot of people thought, and I'm happy about that. So
yeah, well, digital. Sorry,
I think there's something to be said for like comics are kind of the experience of reading comics in book form is like a very different, more intimate thing than, you know, kind of staring at a screen and kind of scrolling through a website. And so I do think, like, at the end of the day, I think that there's a more kind of intimate moment of reading where you're able to kind of disconnect from data, because let's say you're kind of reading a comic on your computer. Well, your computer now is like what you're doing your work on, you have your email on, you get notifications on. So, or you're reading it on your phone, like you're going to have like, you know, interruptions of like messages coming up while you're trying to kind of get into the story. So I think the fact that you're reading, it's like, I don't know. I think there is something to be said for like the tactile nature of like reading a comic, particularly comics, because something about images on a page as opposed to on a screen and not having that backlight on your eyes and stuff. And I know they try to mimic it with like the Kindle and all of these different tablets to kind of try to pretend to be a page. But there's something really beautiful about like the tactile experience of reading a book, like a physical book. And I remember during that whole digital stage, like, arguing very often with people about how like books are not going away just because of the fact that for people who love books, they like sincerely love books. They love the experience of books. They love the smell of books. And so I think what you're getting at, like in the sense of like, maybe it'll take away the guys who bought like the Tom Clancy novel at the grocery store, like, does that make sense? Like that reader might just, consume it online, like the mass readership. But like the core readers, you're right, are going to go for like quality over quantity. They're going to go for that cloth down book. I mean, I know I go out of my way, like Chris Ware always publishes these like beautiful, like cloth bound books. And they're a little pricey, but like anytime he puts something out, I buy it. And it's not just because of the art and the story. It's because I know like the whole experience is going to be cool. Like the book itself is really beautiful. And I think going that route with books is always good, especially if you can afford to do it. Like if you can afford to get that printing, it's man. I mean, that's going to make a huge difference for readers, and they're gonna feel like they have something special. This won't be something they kind of disregard, So
yeah, no, excellent point. I didn't even think about that in terms of the. Yeah, that just adds to it. But I think with digital, one of the things that I think we've kind of forgotten, maybe not universally, but why do people have? I mean, take it to the extreme. I mean, imagine everything went digital. I mean, at a certain point in time, you've got to draw a line, right? I can't have my, I can't have a hat that I want to wear be digital, right? I need a physical hat. And there's a certain point at which some things have to be physical, right? And so from that point, you draw a line to everything being physical ever, right? And somewhere in the middle there is kind of an ideal position society-wide where you have the things that should be digital are digital, the things that should be physical are physical. And I think in general, having access to an MP3 player with music is a superior experience to me if I'm out walking, so I don't have to like carry an LP player around.
Yeah.
And hold it in front of me like a crazy person.
Yeah.
MP3 is a better experience. There's still room for the LPs, of course, obviously, as they continue to sell. Strangely, I mean, you can walk into a Barnes and Noble and there's an LP section. It takes up a huge amount of shelf space. These LPs. Imagine predicting that 15 years ago that LPs would be back on the shelves.
Yeah.
And in these premium packages with foil stamping all over them, and people are buying them. Maybe that's a bit of a fad, with LPs. But the general point I'm making is people buy trinkets that are important to them. They put them on their shelves. They buy art to hang on the walls. People having some sort of really trophies in essence, something that represents your passions. It's important for people to have that. And I just think that there's there's such a rush. Maybe it's almost like a panicked rush where everyone is marching toward an all digital future, even though we don't need to go that way, and meanwhile, there are all these perfectly reasonable people that are just continuing to buy the things that makes them happy. And I think that to a degree, that's why I say it's such an important thing. Digital is great, but it can be empty if it's supplanting something that would be better experienced physically, and everyone can kind of feel that vacancy.
So like a really good example too, just pairing off of that a bit, is like they came out with these emulators. Like the first ones, this is in music for amplifiers for guitars, and I think it started with like Line 6, which was like one of the first emulating amps, and it was fairly good, but there's something about it that just seemed kind of fake. And they've gotten better and better throughout the years. But Big Muff pedals, which are like a classic just distortion pedal, very basic pedal, very like old school technology, not like there's really nothing digital about them. And the classic Big Muff still sells. It's still a bestseller for a guitarist because there's something about the warm tone you get. Like same with tube amps. Tube amps haven't decreased in popularity. They've just increased in price because the sound of a warm humming tube on an amplifier, it's irreplaceable. You can't emulate it. And I think it's the same with vinyl. It's the same with like a hardbound book. Like there's something beautiful about it that you just can't really get on your screen. And if your computer crashes, you lose your book collection, whereas and I guess you can make the same argument. Like, let's say there's a fire or something, then you lose your books. But the point being, there is something really beautiful about like that moment of really reading a book, experiencing the design of a book. And I think the reading experience is much superior because it kind of demands your attention, just a one-on-one interaction. And like I said,
that's an excellent point.
Has a million things competing. Your iPad has a million things competing for your attention. But if you're sitting down with a book, like you're usually pretty focused. You maybe sit in a quiet corner, in your house or whatever. So, I'm excited. I'm excited to hear somebody advocating for hardbound books.
And that's a reaction that I've gotten quite a lot is that people don't know why they kind of are simultaneously excited and nervous about the idea because they say, oh, who would get involved in a business that is promoting more physical, like more expensive, more premium physical stuff? Like if anything, if you're gonna take the risk and do physical, make it, you might not want to invest in these like super expensive editions because everything's going digitally. And maybe this is an argument that's not made anymore but 3 years ago when I got started, it was, it's the opposite way of what I think is the reality of it. I mean, look, you trust your gut on it, right? Everybody is secretly, as far as I can tell, at least unless I'm crazy and people are not being honest with me, everybody can kind of feel that they want to retain physical books, right? There's that little bit of a fear of losing that everybody can sense palpably. Like, what if they go away? What if books go away? And it's a strange, if everyone has the fear, what's the problem? Like, it means that it's important to us. And I think that it's not just about books, of course. It's for everything. We're being kind of forced into a very, very fast, not to get philosophical here, but think about human evolution, right? This is a very quick change in a very short period of time to a digital world where, within 15 years, you have a massive conversion. This whole idea of, we used to go to the store and buy a video cassette to watch a movie on. I used to go to a store and buy an audio tape, and there was an experience associated with that is like precious memories of being a kid and, getting that favorite video game, going to the mall and hanging out with my family to go do it. That's a lost experience in a move to digital, and it cheapens everything. It makes everything less enjoyable. And I guess just to cap on that thought, I did actually, with a publisher friend of mine, I don't want to say who he is just because of, but he worked for a publisher that made this same argument in their book quality. They do amazing books. They're beautiful. And I suggested my theory to him that whatever I was going to do with the books, I wanted to overprint, and I wanted to have a lot of copies that I could send to publishers, or rather for press to review, just as you would do. And I thought, well, another thing that's really important to me is I said, at first there was a discussion of why would you print all copies to be the most expensive, like the most premium? Like why wouldn't you have some soft covers, for example? Like on Kickstarter, you'll have like a $20 soft cover and a $40 hardcover. I have a $30 hardcover and no soft cover. So it's kind of stupid to do that, basically, because you're not hitting an ideal price point. And I guess it's supposed to be 25 is the most perfect price point for books for Kickstarter. But I said, no, the reason that I want every edition to have it is because I want to make sure that everybody who has the book, who would ever talk about the book, would ever show the book, it does a YouTube video showing the book, does a review, all of them have the best edition. So no one's got the soft cover, Yeah, I mean, you imagine that you have a hardcover book that has foil stamped and embossed, debossed cover, a sculptural deboss that's so attractive. It's going to be gorgeous. You can't not talk about that. You can't not bring it up. And every time, if you show it in front of the camera, it's going to glisten. And so I don't want somebody doing like a review with the junkie edition. They get the wrong idea. And so, the publisher confirmed that in his experience, is over 30 years, I believe, of experience publishing, he said that that's absolutely true. That if you give a hardcover copy to a reviewer, they feel as though they like it more than a softbound edition. They feel the story is better. They review the book higher in general. And I don't know what the science is behind that, but I trust him. It makes sense. It's part of the package. And so I think there's some science behind that. And I think you can extrapolate that. Maybe it's naive, but I think you can expand that to the digital logic. It's not just about hardcover versus softcover. It's softcover versus digital. And will somebody have a better experience if they have a physical book that they can hold on to? I think they will.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So let's see. There's some comments in the chat. Let's see. I think I don't know if it's exactly on topic, but they're talking about. Let's see. Let me go back. Oh man, this is going back way in the chat. Hold on a second. Yeah, it's a little off topic, but it's just talking about comic book stores kind of closing and everything. But I think there's more problems, with that, and I don't know that we can really get into right now. It's a whole other scenario. But so there was something I was going to bring up, and now it's escaping me.
Yeah, while you think about that, it is a shame about comic stores, and this isn't some way of trying to supplant this model. And in fact, I like to think that it would be nice to have the book be successful enough that I could get it into stores.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that stores are going to be interested in my book, And the thing is, it's kind of a two-part. Like I don't criticize the wholesale model, saying that stores are being greedy by any extent. Stores are not rolling in it, even with the wholesale books. I mean, it's just simply that it's not a criticism. It's just an awareness that I just can't make enough money to get by unless I do a direct sale model. And I would love to be able to work with everybody, and have these books in stores if that was possible. But what it really is, and I don't think it's that it's gone downhill or changed for the negative. Actually, that may be happening, but for different reasons, as you say. It's more just that this type of book wouldn't exist without this model. Like it. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like Yooka-Laylee and the Kracklestone in 1995 would be in every store and I would have sold 1 million copies. It wouldn't be like that. Yooka-Laylee and the Kracklestone wouldn't exist in 1995. Comics based on games were limited to the biggest properties. I mean, there was a Mario comic, a Super Mario comic, and a Legend of Zelda comic that Nintendo had done. One book for each of those, for those huge properties. And who knows how that comic even did. I guess well enough that it was reprinted now 25 years later, but both of them were, and I love them. But you would not get, first of all, you wouldn't get an indie game. Indie games weren't made. They were called shareware, and they'd be on the computer, right? You'd have to send discs to people. You have to call a company and say, "Here, please mail me a disc with your game on it," and I'll pay you. I'll send you a check in the mail. That's not a viable method. You wouldn't have this type of indie game development. You wouldn't have books based on indie games. So that's why I think the industry is better than ever. It actually is improved because it's allowed access to this, but that doesn't mean it's an easy entry point for these unusual projects.
Yeah, and you are starting to see, I mean, nowadays, I mean, it's possible that you might see, if even without the business model that you've kind of set up, because I know you might see some indie games, because it seems like there's so many different things that are being licensed right now, and it's not just the big things. There's like companies like, I don't know, IDW and Lion Forge, and there's just a ton of companies that are just licensing pretty much anything that has any kind of a fan base. Now, whether whether they're successful or they'll stay publishing those. I don't know, but it is cool that you can. It seems like almost anything that you're a fan of, you can find. There's probably some sort of comic book adaptation. I don't know how big the fan base is for Yooka-Laylee, but again, I like your approach to this, and I think that the other problem is if one of these comic book companies that does all this license was to license something like that, I don't know if they're going to be able to get to tap into that fan base as much as what you're doing with Kickstarter, because maybe those video game fans, even though when they see this comic, they're going to want it, but it might not be enough to get them to go into a comic book store and search that out in the comic book store.
Well, that's a problem, but then there's another problem too. Something I probably shouldn't say about the development process, but I can tell you that I don't think it would resonate with fans of the game, because this is something, I've been talking so much about the business end of things that I haven't really gotten into the real substance of it, which is that I'm trying to make a killer graphic novel. Like, it's not, there's two parts to it, right? And the first part that I haven't even gotten to is you have to make sure that you make something really good. It's got to be good enough for people to want it a lot. And that's the only stuff worth making. Like, I don't want to waste my time making a licensed book. It's a work of passion that happens to be a license. I treat their characters the same way as the ones that I would create myself. Fans are savvy nowadays. They can see right through the marketing books. They can see through the ancillary product production line, And when you have a popular game, there are people who are their jobs and to some degree, bless these people, but it's their jobs to go through and figure out all this ancillary product production. They'll say, okay, we're going to make this type of product. We're going to make keychains and plush dolls, and we're going to do this. And slated in there, bizarrely to me, but understandably, is usually a comic of some kind. And it's like a quick, cheap thing. It's like something that you would get, in a cereal box, right? It's just junk. And that is so disrespectful to the fan community of a game that's popular enough to warrant it. I don't get it. It's just a different medium. I don't understand what the difference is. You put all this passion into the game, put the same passion into the comic. And fortunately, Playtonic Games was in agreement on that. They said, look, we could just license a comic. We wouldn't have to put up with Dave and his nonstop questions and demands over getting the game access and all kinds of stuff. And I bugged them for 2 years. They wouldn't have to put up with that. They could just hire a publisher to just get something done quickly. It would take 3 months to get done. They have their budget for it, and they'd self-fund it, and it would just be a merchandising thing, right? I don't know. Maybe they do a great job, but maybe I'm being overly harsh. I just think that as long as a project is started with passion for the property, then it can be good. But you can't start from the merchandising perspective. That's right from the start. People are going to see right through that, especially nowadays. It's like, that's a hurdle I have to overcome with people. Is I have to convince them that this is not some cheap cash in. That it's a passion project, and the best way I can tell people that is I've worked overtime hours every day for 2 years to get to this point, and we still have time to go on the book, and also just show it off and hope people like what they see.
Yeah, and I think you can see that in the video that you made for the Kickstarter. Definitely, you definitely see the passion. So I have a question that's kind of getting a little away from the topic as far as this business model and everything. But so you had mentioned the your love of these characters and everything, and on your Kickstarter video and everything, you show some of the concept. There's some concept designs for some of the ancillary characters and everything, not just the two main characters. But So I'm curious, how many of those are from the game? Because I'm not really that familiar with the game, and how many of those, if any, did you create for this particular book?
There are quite a few characters that I took from the game, because the game has. Let me just load it up, and I'll tell you. Basically, the game has a ton of characters. Like when it's funny because when you play through the game, you might not even realize just how many. I think it's something like 65 characters or something in the game, unique characters, something like that. So I didn't want to create too many, because you have this problem where people are fans of the game and there's so much to work with there. So I'm like, why not use the characters from the game? And the whole point is to kind of expand on those characters. So I only created characters where I had to fill something in, or where it was something that I thought would disappoint readers if there wasn't something new in this particular circumstance. Like, for example, one of the, there's a lot of reference to game logic, like adventure game logic, like a game like this, where in the game you jump into these fantasy worlds. They call them tomes or big books they jump into, and they're whisked off to a fantasy world. And in each one of these worlds, you eventually end up having to fight a boss monster, right? And just call it a boss battle, right? And so I'm like, it's kind of a weird gamey logic to try and adapt in a book, but I do have like 2 boss fights in the book that are references to the challenge of a boss fight in a game. And if those were just recreations of the boss fights from the game, then I know that people would be I would be really disappointed. So I created 2 unique boss creatures. So yeah, within the list, we got Yooka-Laylee, Rextro, Dr. Puzz, Cardos, Nimble, Planker. Those are all from the game. And then the Flower Corplet, the Mush Muncher. I love that guy. And the Bombly Bug, the Bramblebee, Rupert the Pantless, the Bombly Bug Queen are all unique. Dr. Quack and Capital B and Trouser are from the game. And then there's a multitude of other characters that I have not revealed in the Kickstarter as well. Yeah,
so it seems like you've got to kind of strike that balance, because you have to show the people, the fans of the game, you have to show them the world that they kind of know, and what they expect to see, but then you also have to expand on that world. So
yeah, it's a tricky balance, and you only have so much room.
Right. Yeah. How many pages is the book again?
It's 120. Okay. I do have a stretch goal to add like another comic, but the story itself is pretty much locked in.
Cool. Awesome.
So I have a few questions that are totally off topic, if you don't mind me asking.
Sure.
There's just like a little bit of the biography you were mentioning, your own biography of how you kind of ended up sort of quitting gaming, like working in the game industry, which is a fairly lucrative industry. Feels like there's like two hubs, maybe. I'm close to one, so I know a lot of game artists. So kind of that transition from that to just kind of full bore going on your own comic project, and then this license project, which is also sounds pretty spearheaded. And having this like aching desire to do story. And I was wondering if you could kind of explain that a little bit more. I mean, you got into it a little bit, but I think especially for the people who like watch our channel, I mean, that's pretty much, Scott and I talk about that kind of thing all the time. But I think probably have that as well, that like weird ache. And so I'm kind of curious, like first off, like I mean, I don't want to totally derail the topic, but
no, I mean, I think I was going to say, I mean, I think we've kind of touched on the topic pretty well, but so I think if we want to go off, then yeah.
Okay, so I want to hear, like, first off, like, for people in the chats and people who are aspiring illustrators and designers, and some of the people who like listen to us maybe haven't even worked professionally yet, so they're just aching for that first paid gig. Do you want to kind of explain like what that's like to kind of quit the day job and just kind of like the like the kind of the thoughts that go through your head, like how you're kind of you're keeping a roof over your head, doing your own thing. And I don't know. I think if you kind of touch on that a little bit more, I think people will get a really good I think you glazed over it, but I think people will get a really good perspective on how personal this is to you, because it sounds like a very risky endeavor, and like in a good way, but I'm kind of curious like what that's like, and then kind of having gone through this, like how many pages are you in at this point?
Well, I do have, just to answer your last question. I have all one.
That's like 20 questions.
No. It's awesome. It's good. I don't have an awful lot of opportunities to talk about that, really, to be honest. So it's good. As far as that last question, it's 120 pages. I do have the line art all finished. So we're the way that I do the line art, because I like to use a very organic coloring style, so I don't like to use black fills. So I pretty much just have the outlines, and then I just do the coloring at this point. I have about 16 pages colored or so, or at least started in color.
So you're saying you color hold like all your line, like none of it's black?
Yeah, everything is color, including the lines. I also color the lines, which takes forever.
Oh yeah, but it shows in your work, and I said this before we started recording. I'll say it on air too, but it's like you guys should definitely check this out, because the color, I mean, strong drawing and everything else, but the color on it there's something really unique and cool about the way you're approaching color and how like saturated it is, and it's a very bold coloring style you're using that would freak me out, because you're always running the risk of it just being like a unicorn barfing, you know. But you pull it off, and it's really balanced and structured, but it's just like crazy saturation, but like in a good way. And I think it's a really, I don't know, just I don't know. I think it's worth people checking out. So like 120 pages you've made before running the Kickstarter. So that's, years.
Yeah, it was 2 years. It was a big risk.
Yeah. So that's 2 years. And so what is that 2 years like? Like what's kind of like, what is that life like? Because you're really gambling a lot on a project you believe in, at probably some risk. So what's that like? Like, and why?
Yeah.
Why do
it?
Yeah.
It's well, now to be fair, I'm saved a little bit by my total lack of ability to visualize the future. So you got to bear in mind that once you kind of put 2 feet in, to it, you reach a point of no return where you're stuck. And so regardless of what happens, you're like, well, I guess I just have to keep going. So it's not so much that I didn't have like some courageous plan. I'd be like, oh, I'll take a risk for 4 years. It was like, can I survive 1 year? And hopefully I'll get this book out, and I had my aspirations that it would sell really, like Dreamside would sell really well, because it'd be like, oh, I'll do the work. I'll make some really pretty art, and then people will want the book. But just nobody reacted. Like I just put it out there. It was the worst. It wasn't that you don't get good or bad reactions. You just get nothing.
Yeah.
That's the worst. I'd rather just have I would post these videos up. I was talking about this earlier, and I was doing another stream today. I'd post up these videos, and I would save all my work for like one of these videos where I'd release a whole chapter as like an animated video, kind of motion comic sort of thing. I think that's all I need to do. I'll make 1 7-minute video, and it will blow people away, because they'll feel like, oh, he doesn't do anything. And then 7-minute video showing just all this nice artwork and everything, and like 5 people would watch it, and I didn't really understand YouTube's algorithms and all that. So I totally got that off. I've done everything wrong. And the bottom line is that when I started, I took on this project after finishing Dreamside, when any sane person would have gone back to work in a studio job, because you'd say, okay, listen, I'm not going to be able to get a good number of sales on Dreamside, the thing that I left my job to do. So the logical thing to do is to move back into a studio job, or, as I said, I had two decisions. I can try one more thing. And I thought, well, maybe if the one more thing doesn't take that long, because the other thing that is worth mentioning here is I didn't do this young. I left Insomniac after about 6 years of work there, 7 years. So I was able to. I'm not a big spender, so I was able to save up quite a lot of money at that time. And then so I thought, okay, I've got a safe amount of money in the bank. I can make it last for a while. And I moved to drag my girlfriend back to my hometown of Western New York, and where the cost of living is not that high. It's not like Los Angeles money. I left paying $30,000 a year to live out there. It was ridiculous. Here, I could get an apartment for $800, $900, and it's not a huge luxurious place, but I can get my work done and we're comfortable. Right.
Yeah. And
so I could make my savings stretch. So you have to understand that there was risk being taken, but it was a half naive, half comfortable risk.
Yeah.
When it came to Yooka, here's where things really got painful. So I made this decision to work on Yooka, and I did it right on the heels of the Kickstarter, which is this smash success. And it was so clear that everybody loved this property and it was going to do extremely well. And, what tends to happen sometimes with Kickstarters, problems came up, as the studio was working on the game, the Wii U, which was the Nintendo platform, which they'd intended to release for, kind of died a little early. And so they basically had to upgrade to the Switch, and that riled a bunch of backers up because they weren't able to, release the version for the Wii U that they had intended. So, they had to kind of break a promise there and had no choice, and then when the game released it, there were some people who ripped into the game. There was this whole kind of, I don't want to get into that too much, but there was this whole kind of political thing that happened when the game released. And there was some guy that was associated with the game as a popular YouTuber. And it's just the kind of thing that is just a mess when a game gets released. And the studio did something that they felt they had to do. And, unfortunately, whenever it's a crazy issue, it alienates half your audience. So, they annoyed a lot of people and they made a lot of people very pleased. That's kind of how it goes, right? But unfortunately, I think that whole controversy made a lot of ugliness for the launch. And then it didn't help that the reviews were very polarized for it. So I'm sitting here a year into, not quite a year. I'm about 8 months into production. My feet are in too far to pull out. And I wouldn't want to anyway. I loved what I was doing. But you have to understand, up until that point, I had nothing but positive impressions of the community and how the game would be received. So all of these negative things just kept coming up. The craziest thing, and this is I think the day I found this out, I almost crashed my car. I was so angry. They had and the studio just got really ruined by this issue. Is they had basically a promised arrangement with the studio to make a maquette figurine for Yooka at this company called Triforce. And they had a great thing that they put together, I guess they had a sample and everything, and they made this arrangement, and they got the green light from Platonic, and they basically they collected a whole bunch of money and then ran off to China. And just took the money and ran. And this was at the time, this was only maybe a couple of months before we were going to launch the Kickstarter. And I thought, oh, this is insane, because now nobody's going to trust me, because, here's a license thing with Yooka, and this thing cost $75. So people didn't get their money back. They had to do chargebacks on their credit card or for PayPal or whatever they used. I was one of them.
Oh, man.
And I got my money back thanks to PayPal. But the point being, I thought this is a nightmare situation, because all these negative things kept coming up. And I thought the property keeps getting bashed more than I think it deserves. I think it's a brilliant game. I thought one reviewer gave it a 2 out of 10, which is I thought was just a beyond cruel review. And especially when given the passion of the team and what they accomplished, it's kind of heartbreaking. So that all came up, and it was basically a year and a half of taking everything, and I had to combine this with the fact that my skills just weren't getting the result I wanted. I did kind of have to keep reworking stuff, kind of like I did with Dreamside. Everything just took longer than I expected. And so I'm dealing with all of this, the project's taking so long, and I thought it was going to finish in 10 months, but I can't even see the light at the end of the tunnel. And reviewers are ripping on the game, and I can't. And the worst part is I can't talk about any of it. I had to keep it all private, and it's just me sitting here, twiddling my thumbs at my computer. It's all right, got to just remind myself that I'm working with the folks that made my childhood passion games, the stuff that I loved, and this is fun. And, that's that. And it will be great in the end. The book will be good. No matter what happens with the game, the book will be good. Yeah. And, I really I know it sounds corny, but I really wanted to do something back for the developers, because I'm part of my influence as an artist is because of these games. I tell them this, and their British humor will tell me to not be a sap. but I tell them, I said, look, you really improved, the whole sort of sphere of gaming experience that I had when I was a teenager. And I love these games. It was really happy experiences playing these. And I'm I want to give something back to that team. Yeah. So anyway, so not to give you a long rambling answer, but basically it's not so much that I took a big risk. It's that I just kind of kept tripping, but I was too far in to quit. So it wasn't a grand plan. It was just but I guess the overarching major thing is that what's most important professionally for me is to be able to develop my own concepts and ideas. It's always something I wanted to do. And as cool as it is to work with an awesome studio like Insomniac, I mean, they're great. I mean, I love the Spider-Man game they just put out. You know, it wasn't really, at least at the time, the place for me. That might change in the future, you know. But when you're at a studio, and I want to be careful I'm saying this, I don't want to sound arrogant, I guess, is that, you know, you're part of a large team and your influence is diminished to a degree compared to what you could do on your own, obviously, and for better or worse. So I figured what I kind of want to do is I have this passion to make all these original ideas. I want to tell stories. I have like Dreamside was like banging on my head, you know, to come out like that story. I love that story to death. And so I couldn't do that in a studio environment.
Yeah,
they wouldn't, you know, you do things as a collective, and that's great. The results are amazing, but it's not so much that it was like a weighing the two. It was like, there's only one option. You know, like I could stay at the studio and always want that, you know, other thing and never do it, or try and, you know, do my nights and weekends thing, which was killing me, you know, or I can say, all right, you know what, let me just give it a go. And if it doesn't work, then I'll reapply to some studios.
yeah, I think that's a pretty, you know, it's weird because you were kind of saying like you don't want to come across as like cocky or whatever, but it doesn't come across that way at all to me. I'm a member of the NCS, which is like the LA chapter of it, and so there's like cartoonists in there like directed like Disney films, you know, and they'll say that like. And you know, it's not that they hate Disney; they have no problem with it. Disney makes amazing things. They're proud of where they worked and all of that. But at the end of the day, like in film and in games and in most like I'm an art director by day, and you know, so in like the souvenir industry. But like no matter what industry, if you're in a creative department, it's a group effort. It's not an individual effort. And unfortunately, in that process, like a lot of that individual expression kind of gets crushed a little bit. Even in the most like, and I swear it's like, you know, most people will look at like where you worked and be like, dude, Insomniac Games, that sounds amazing. And it probably was. I mean, what you guys did, you know, that is an amazing company. They make amazing stuff. But I guarantee most of the artists there have all these moments of compromise. And that's not saying anything against them, because you have to compromise to have that big, you know, all those cogs working together to make something bigger. But there's this beauty to comics, and it's this addictive kind of psychotic beauty to comics, where it's one of the few mediums where you can be all the wheels, you can be like all the cogs, and you can get like the whole thing done. Like you don't need a team, you don't need like in-betweeners, you don't like you can be the ship.
Right.
And I think other than like maybe just like writing a novel or something, there's not a lot of outlets like that for people who have that, like you were describing, that just like that ache, you know, where you're like it's like no matter how fun the thing you're working on is, there's this ache to kind of make story and like a need to kind of get this thing out. And so I think that's a really cool, it's just cool to hear from you. It's always cool. Like I never get bored of that story, you know? And yet I meet so many creatives who are not making that thing. And I think even if you have a job, like people need to do that. Like you're gonna burn out like your soul if you don't have an outlet to kind of put out. And it's cool to me that you kind of, like you said, the way you describe it, I think is a perfect way to describe it. It's like kind of tripping through it, and then it kind of gets done because at some point you're in too deep, but in a good way. And I think more people need that experience. Like more people should be doing that. Like I think if you're creative, you know, most illustrators and artists I've met, like anywhere, have that thing. And if you're not getting it out, you're just gonna, I don't know, it like creates this like bitterness and so like I don't know, I think it's really cool that you found like an outlet to do that, and that you're being proactive about it, and that you built this thing because it looks like it's funded, which is cool. So hopefully more people fund it, like watching this, just to kind of support that, because we want to support that kind of thing. Because like most people viewing this are creatives, and
Okay.
They all have that fire, so let's make it, work
Yeah.
for everybody.
And on in reaction to that, as you were talking, there's a comment about the benefit of divorcing yourself with a final product in that group environment teaches you patience, listening, realizing you may need an outside editor, and teaches you to stop, to be able to call it done. That's an interesting comment, and actually, kind of combining the two, there is no perfect solution. I should note, it's not that it should be all one voice or not. You know what I like to think about it as is I use this analogy of a painting, right? If you were to walk into a museum and you see a painting that you think is very beautiful on the wall, and you look to see who made the painting, and you see like a signature right in the corner, it doesn't surprise anybody that there's only one name on it, because we have an expectation that a painting is made by an individual. I mean, there are obviously cases where people collaborated on paintings, but it's almost a strange thought if you think about it. Like you get halfway through the painting and give it off to somebody. So we see paintings as singular works typically. I think most people I think the majority of people would say that their expectation is that if they see a painting, that one person made it. Whether or not that's true is another story. So to me, any work is like a painting. A book is just more complicated. You have multiple paintings in a book, but I still see it as a singular artistic effort. And there are two ways to produce that artistic effort. You can do it as a group, or you can do it individually. If you do it as a group, it's not better or worse. It's just different.
Yeah.
But the one thing that you get with a group that you cannot, or the one thing that you get by yourself that you cannot get as a group under any circumstances is a complete and absolute lack of compromise. And the thing about it is that what that does is it leaves, as the comment stated, it leaves a lot of sharp edges, things that are dangerous, that are a little too much, a little too extreme, or maybe because you don't necessarily have an editor, unless you do, who can help you narrow things down. And sometimes it's great to have other people to bounce the ideas off and help you avoid doing something really dumb. But the problem with that is that the guaranteed outcome of that, even if 90% of the time that's the best way to do it, and of course you can always bounce stuff off friends, which I do all the time. But 90% of the time that might be good. But it doesn't change the fact that it will never be a singular work. And if you have two artists who are very ambitious and they work together and they collaborate, you can end up with something beautiful. But inevitably, especially if they work very well together, they're going to bounce ideas off each other. But it's always going to be what the end product is always going to sort of be a mishmash of ideas. Yeah. And it's not better or worse. It's just that singular expression just would never exist if the person works collaboratively. And the other problem with working collaboratively, and this is a slightly more cynical view of collaboration that I just have to bring up, is that one of the problems with collaboration is that you can end up with a situation where the best of people's creativity actually doesn't come out.
Exactly.
Because you sort of get ideas squashed. I used to think it was apparently that it's not the Disney Imagineers that created this process. Apparently it was a Pixar, I guess, but they call it the
idea.
As a Blue Sky idea. It might, I'm not sure where it originated, but it's the
not the studio Blue Sky, but the concept of Blue Sky. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. It's the yes and.
That's right. Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. So the yes and it encourages the best of creativity. Where when you tell somebody no, or you say, oh, that's a terrible idea or whatever, you shut people down creatively, and people don't participate. Artists are notoriously arrogant, prideful people, because you have the sense of beauty that you're trying to convey, you're trying to get out. And it forces you to be a little arrogant. Like, I want my idea out there, because if you can see what I see, then you'd see how nice it is. But you have to convince other people of that. And if you're not very good at convincing other people of your idea, then it can be very hard to get that idea into the product. And again, that idea may be terrible, it may be a terrible idea, and it's great that they shut you down on it. And I've had many times where I look back on my old work and I say, I wish I had given that to somebody who could point out the obvious. And I wouldn't have done that terrible thing that I did. But it's a gamble, and again, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's just that they're parallel developments in a way. And the only way to get the beauty of an original work by one individual, to see a painting, right, is for somebody to just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, so I guess like to tack onto that to just kind of support what you're saying, because I agree with 100% of what you're saying. It's like with a collaboration with a group, you're kind of creating something as a collective, and part of being a collective requires compromise and should require compromise. Like that, I would be a crappy collaborator if I just kind of dictated everything that everyone was going to do. So by collaborating, inevitably some ideas will get lost in the shuffle. And as an artist, most artists I know have this like kind of thing where you want to see what happens if let's just use a poster as an example. You're doing a poster for a client. The client asks for a change that you think is a bad move. You sell you make it as good as possible, but at the back of your brain, you have this visual of what the poster looked like before it got killed by the client. Now, that doesn't mean the client's a bad person. And in fact, maybe the client knows something about the market you don't know. Like maybe they made a better decision than you would make. But it's like, when you work professionally, you're kind of backlogging all of those moments of those compromises you're making for the market, for the client, for your collaborators. Like, you also don't want to kill all your teammates' ideas, so like you kind of have to kill a few of yours to allow them to have theirs. And so it's like you get a lot of good, and there's something really cool and crazy, like, especially friends of mine who work in the film industry, a lot of people really enjoy that process. Like I enjoy the creative process. There's a cool thing when your team's under the gun and you kind of pull off the impossible. There's like this high from it. It's really weird. And you kind of don't get that on your own project. Like that rush of like, we all did this together. Like you feel like troops in battle who just won a big victory, but like, so that's like, but it doesn't mean the end result's bad with the collaboration, but like when you've backlogged all those moments of like wanting to see your own vision all the way through to finish, whether it sucks or not, like you just kind of want to see it through and like take the input you want. So like you were saying, like, have select friends you show it to that you trust the opinion of and tell them, be brutally honest, because we're artists, we want to get other eyes on it. There is something really, really cool about being able to like sit down and be like, you know what? No, this time my client's me, and I'm gonna make the best thing I can make. And I think a good example of the result is just like look at look at this book that's being kickstarted. It's beautiful, and I think if you had more hands in the pot, maybe it would be beautiful. But I think some of the crazy colors you're using in a good way, they're crazy in an awesome way. I don't know if those will get through. They might get dulled down. They might, maybe the time constraint changes. And so it's like, oh, we can't color hold all the lines. So we're just going to go with black lines, that kind of thing. Yeah. I think there's something to be said for both, but I think for an artist, maybe it's just that like artists like us are kind of cocky or something, but for artists, I think most artists, I would suspect, have that backlog, and there's something really cathartic about just being about like making your own thing and seeing it through and being like, this actually looks like what I want it to look like. And that's not you're right about that not being an easy task, because you mentioned that before too. It's like, of course you're going to go into it thinking it's going to be a little more simple than it is, because there's no team to kind of like the beauty of personal projects too is like there's no one to blame for the failure other than yourself.
It's your own fault. Yeah,
you're really forced to look in the mirror at your own skills, whereas if you're on a creative team, you can kind of pass the buck, at least in your head, maybe not out loud, but in your head you can be like, yeah, this would have been cool if I had gotten my way. And then when you are the only person in your way, that's a really cool thing for artistic growth, because you really do have to face like, wow, this is like this drawing, I thought I was really good at this and it's not so great. Like, so then, but the cool thing is you're going to have higher expectations of yourself, if than a lot of people would.
Right.
You're going to have a higher aesthetic. So you can take the time to improve it and make it exactly what your vision is, which sounds like you did with this book. So to me, like I don't know. That's the example of like why I think. I also just think for like, we're I don't know. I mean, I do know a few. I guess I have met a few creatives who don't have that push. I envy them a little bit. the ones who don't want to do their
Well, yeah,
own
I
thing?
mean, some people prefer to be in a team. I think that
Yeah.
one more thing that I would say that's also I think actually is the most frustrating aspect of collaborative working, for me anyway, is that uh, your ideas sometimes will seem insane up front. In fact, the more creative your ideas are, the more insane they'll seem. And usually, in order for me, what I've learned over the years is when I have a crazy idea that can turn into a good idea, I have to prove it. And so I have to show it through some sort of conceptual work. And the problem with doing that is that takes time to produce. And so when you're in a studio environment, often ideas will be shut down before you have a chance to prove that they could work. And so the challenge there is that I might have a good idea, but it doesn't mean I've communicated it effectively to the team. And sometimes it feels like when you're trying to run in your sleep,
Yeah.
you're just like, you just can't move forward. Like, I'm just trying so hard to figure out how I can convince somebody to do something that I know as a professional artist, in my experience and the skill that I developed tells me that this is something that I can do. I could be wrong, but I feel that it's right. But I cannot put that image in somebody's head without concepting it. And even if you concept it, that doesn't mean that your concept is going to be convincing. Your concept may be too rough. It might be too quick. It might not. You might not have done a good enough job of representing the idea that would be better in the final. So it's very frustrating to do that. But then I also looks like Robert said another thing that's a totally separate aspect of this, which is he says a client is part of your team too. And that's actually what I like to do there is I like to totally separate these things, because I think everything that we've been talking about is just about the development process. But of course, when it comes to a client, it's a totally different experience. You have to kind of weigh the foundation of the project and step back and say, okay, what's the goal here? If it's a client job, the client is always the king.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you think. It's all about what the client wants. Now, a professional is supposed to provide feedback when, there's a reason they're hiring you, right? And so to a point, if the client says something that I think won't work, I usually will speak up about it. I'll say, I don't think this works. If the client says, no, this is the way I want it, then I do a 180 and I do everything the client wants. And I try and make that vision the best thing it can be, because of two things. One, I assume that in that case, there's just as good a likelihood that I'm 100% wrong and the client's right. And then two, even if the client is wrong, it's the client.
Yeah.
So, and it's my job to make their terrible idea great.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. A client is, you have to honor the client who is coming to you with an expectation of quality, and the exchange is that they pay you and for a particular thing. And they usually don't want any sort of arrogance or haughty attitude in that regard.
For sure. And I do think Aaron Drapelin's a really good example of like a good kind of communicator when it comes to like the way to behave with clients. I think
I'm not sure who that is.
Treating yourself as an artist, like don't get too highfalutin, just be a blue collar worker. Like you're a contractor, you got hired to do a job.
Right.
Like you think that the wall in the house that you got hired to build would maybe look better here, but the one they're asking, like, it still works with the supports. It's just aesthetically less cool, but you're a contractor and you're getting hired to do it, so you do it, and make it the best you can.
Sorry.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm getting at is more of like the beauty of there's beauties to both. There's beauties to the collaboration, but it's the main thing I'm trying to target is there's this very cathartic, very self-fulfilling thing about being able to see your vision, like being your own client and making the work you want to make, like the thing that got you to draw in the first place, that kind of thing. And I think people who have that know it, like you just feel it when you're working on other stuff. There's a little part of you that's like, why aren't you working on this giant thing that's in the back of your head on a daily basis telling you like, you got to work on this thing. And there's something beautiful about the fact that like to just take a moment and have a breath and be like, I can do that. Like you can, like, what's preventing you from doing it? We're the only people in our way when it comes to seeing our visions come to life, like with art. And then time is going to be the big nemesis as well. And then money, of course, is a huge nemesis as well. But like, being able to kind of navigate it and try to kind of make it happen, I think that's much better than sitting on that thing, because I've seen people who've sat on that kind of thing, and it's usually kind of explosive if you sit on it. Because that makes for the person who takes a client and hates the client, which you shouldn't, like we were saying. But it's like you can build all this resentment because it's like you're filling a I don't know. It's like you're filling a giant, like a balloon full of air, and it's just going to explode at some point if you don't like let some air out. And like that's literally like the process of creating your own properties. I think can be a really good thing. I'm not saying it's for everyone. I'm just saying there's a beauty to it, and I love seeing the results when it's done perfectly. When it's done well, it's a different kind of art, like you were saying about paintings. It's a lot different than like a group mural, Both can be good, but there's just something really neat about like something that's got that signature. And I think that's really cool. Anyhow, I'm rambling about that. Scott, you got anything to chime in on that?
No, I mean, this is all good stuff, but I think we're past our hour and a half. I mean, wow. I'm sure we could sit here and talk to Dave forever, and we might talk a little more after, assuming that, because I know it's pretty late where you're at, but
that's all right.
But yeah, so I don't know if there's any like closing thoughts that anyone wanted to say before we start wrapping things up.
Well, yeah, I mean, mainly just thanks for having me. First of all, this is great. I mean, it's as I alluded to earlier, it's been so long developing this privately that it's kind of been a crazy past 2 weeks because it's just suddenly very public, and I had no idea what to expect. So it's a ton of fun and very quite cathartic to actually be able to talk about the project. So thanks for having me, and this is a lot of fun. I hope that we'll have a chance to do this again in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, I only see more of these projects coming from you in the future, because I just know that this one's going to be beyond what it's already hit its goal. I just think it's going to be, hopefully, super successful beyond what you had anticipated, and just carry on, because I just love what you're doing. So I want to see more of it.
I appreciate that. I think that there's the goal, of course, is to do a lot of these. I've kind of coined this game legend series branding for it, but basically it's just a way to kind of differentiate between the original projects that I want to do. I mean, I literally have something like 13 to 15 stories waiting.
Awesome.
Past Dreamside that are driving me just as nuts. Some more than others. In fact, one I wrote, because Dreamside I actually wrote back in 2003. And, this other one that I did, it was like from 2005, and that one's just been sitting there. It's a totally different story. But it's, everything just takes so long. You just don't have time to do them all. And then you add on to that the Game Legends series. And I think there's a hole in the industry for really good, high quality game adaptations. Someone who will do it with authenticity and is not going to treat it like a piece of merchandise for the game, and treat it like the same passion that the game was made. So that's pretty much it. The same passion that the team brought to the game, which I think was amazing. I'm doing the same thing for the book. In fact, the writer of the game remarked that to me. He said, I can't believe how long you spent on this book. I think I may actually be a little bit longer than the average team member on the game actually was. So it's almost like its own little game development in book form. And what I want to do is branch out and be able to get some help from some people, and because right now it's just me, but I really would love to have 3 to 4 of these books made per year. I think that's probably the max, is like 4 books a year that involve work with other artists.
That's what I was going to ask, but I didn't know if we want to get too much into that, or if you were worried about the quality control. But if you can find people that are passionate about other projects like you're passionate about Yooka-Laylee.
I have a solution for the quality control thing. Not to get into a thing, but just briefly, I thought very hard about the quality thing, because that's one problem I have, is that I'm a real jerk about that. I'm worried that I'll be too hard to work with in that regard, because I'll constantly say, hey, can you just kind of redraw this a few more times? And get like the director who shoots things 87 times, and I'll get like a horse head in my bed one day or something. And so I'm worried about that. But then I think I have a solution for it that might just work, and that is that I think one of the problems, I don't know if it's a problem, but it's a problem to me, I guess at a gut level, with modern comic production, is that everything that's on the shelf always has 53 people involved. And what I think artists want is related to everything that we've been talking about to some degree. At least some artists want to have the whole book. And I think one way to do that is to work with one artist, kind of like the way that I put this book together. Let another book be another artist's vision, right? And they do the whole thing. So I have to find that kind of artist, somebody who would want to take on the entire project and make it theirs, and then promote the book that way. This is, yes, it's something that I'm producing, and I would want to edit and have control over the production quality if it's under my publishing label. But I want to put one person on each book, and that way I have this theory that if somebody is given absolute control of the book, and they're a very ambitious artist, there's so many artists that can draw circles around anything that I can do. I know a bunch of them on Twitter. It's irritating to see their work because it's just like I feel like I'm working so hard, but I can't do as well as they do. And I think I talk to them and I say, hey, would you want to do a book? And that idea. I think when I tell them, oh, would you want to do the whole book? That instead of being like, oh, I don't have time for that, their eyes light up and they're like, oh my God, I could actually do I could do the whole thing. And so if you give somebody the opportunity to make it theirs, I think they'll make it better. If someone's really passionate about it because it's their vision, they're inevitably going to do a better job than if they're just being hired to do inking on pages 5 through 20. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that's a trick, because I want to have one artist per book and make every book about that artist. Awesome.
Well, let's end it with that, and unless there's anything else that that you wanted to touch on.
If I say anything else, I'll get on another
okay. All right. So let's kind of go around. So Josh, where can everyone find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at quarterlystories.com, where I'm serializing my crazy project. And then you can also find me on topis.io by searching for Quarterly Stories, and 48-Hour Art Check on iTunes, which you should check out, subscribe to, and leave a 5-star review.
I'm going to have to do that myself. So, all right, Dave. So one last pitch for the Kickstarter, and anything else you want to talk about.
That's right. I've got to do that. I'm gonna put the link in the thing here in the chat. But yeah, so I do have my Kickstarter campaign that is currently running. It's got another 2 weeks. We are 100% funded halfway through, so that was very fortunate. So thank you to people who have supported the campaign, and please do consider backing. It'll be a beautiful book, as we've alluded to in this chat. Not just in terms of the book itself, but in terms of the internals. But the book itself is going to be a really awesome hardcover book, and every copy is going to be awesome, regardless of which tier you're at. You can find me at dreamprismpress.com, which is the production company that I've my little LLC, which is kind of becoming a publishing label. And you can find me on social media at Dreamprism Press, pretty much everywhere.
Awesome. And those links will be in the description of this video as well. And yeah, definitely just check out even if you're not familiar, because I wasn't really familiar with the property, but go to the Kickstarter, check out the video, I think you're going to fall in love with this property if you're not already familiar with it. So, and Dave's just doing amazing job with it. So, really impressed and really excited, and I can't wait till it's going to be a little while, but I can't wait to get my hands on the book, because it's going to be something else.
Thanks for your support.
Oh, definitely. So yeah, and with that, I just wanted to thank everyone in the chat. I appreciate all the questions. I think we got to some of them, but not all of them, and that's kind of always the way it goes. But we do appreciate everyone in the chat. And as far as me, you're on my channel, so you know where to find me. You can also find my work at serkworks.com. There's an online store there and everything. And again, if you're new to this, if you're new to this show, and you want to know kind of how it works, the show rotates between Josh's channel and my own. So next week it'll be on Josh's channel and it'll bounce back to mine. And usually, lately it's been on Thursdays, but it can be on a different day. It can every once in a while, it might be even at a different time. But if you want to know, because that sounds kind of confusing, and also if you wanted to be alerted to when we're going live, because YouTube isn't always the best at alerting people, the best way to find out and to be in the know is to join our mailing list, and we don't spam you or anything. Just usually about 30 minutes ahead of time, we send out an email letting you know when we're going to go live. So if you never want to miss an episode live, then definitely check out our mailing list. And I think that's about it. And we will see you next week on Josh's channel.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys. This is great.
Of course.
Yeah, awesome having you on. Go support his Kickstarter now.
Yeah, do it.